Social influence. The topics we'll cover: cultural influences, conformity, mimicry, and norms, obedience, factors and lessons, group situations and group behavior, with such topics as social facilitation, social loafing, polarization, de individuation, groupthink, and the power of individuals. Cultural influences. Culture. The behaviors and beliefs of a group is shared and passed on to others, including the next generation of that group. This sharing of traditions, values, and ideas is a form of social influence that helps to maintain the culture. Norms are the rules, often unspoken but commonly understood, that guide behavior in a culture. Norms are part of the culture, but also part of the way social influence works to maintain the culture. Cultures do change over time. Norms for marriage and divorce have changed in Western culture. So 40, 50 years ago, the views and norms for marriage are much different then than they are today. As the same can go for divorce. Divorces 50 years ago and divorces today are also much different in our particular culture. So, what form of social influence is the subject of this cartoon? You have an older gentleman, and the title of this is Banking on the Youth Market. An older gentleman has stopped in front of a tattoo piercing parlor and looks at a placard outside the business. Be like all your friends and express your individuality. So, be like all your friends and express individuality, somewhat of a contradiction in terms. But the idea is very salient in that what they're discussing is a very powerful form of social influence called conformity. Now, conformity refers to adjusting our behavior or thinking to fit in with a group standard. So there's a group standard out there, and when we see what that standard is, we may adjust our thinking process and our behaviors. That would include things the way we dress, the way we do our hair or wear makeup, if you wear makeup, all those things in order to fit in with that particular group. The power of conformity has many components and forms, including the following: automatic mimicry affecting behavior. We see this can occur when you're talking with somebody and you may begin to gesture very similar to the person you're talking with, the way they gesture their arms and hands. It sort of allows us to sort of engage and link with that person on a somewhat subtle level. Social norms affecting our thinking. The norms that have been established as part of a group will influence the way that we behave or adjust the way we behave or think about things and our day to day actions. And then we have normative and informational social influence. We'll see a little bit more about this in a moment, but the idea is that these factors, all the way from normative and informational social influence to automatic mimicry to social norms, are components of conformity. Now let's look at mimicry. It is not only true that birds of a feather flock together. It is also true that if we flock together, we might choose to wear the same feathers. So you can look at this little photograph here. You can see all the individuals here, no matter how different they may be, ethnicity or what have you, they're all dressed in a very similar way. They're influencing each other by the way they are walking, the way they hold themselves, and the clothes that they choose to wear. Automatic mimicry. Some of our mimicry of other people is not by choice, but automatic. The chameleon effect. Unintentionally mirroring the body position and mood of others around us, leading to contagious yawning, contagious arm folding, and hand wringing or face rubbing. So we do these things that sort of mirror what we see in other people, the chameleon effect. Empathetic. Empathetic shifts in mood that fit the mood of the people around us. So the idea here is that we are copying or mirroring the types of mood that people have that we're engaging with. So copying the actions of others, including the forms of violence, hopefully forms of kindness as well, are part of this empathetic shift in mood, where we're shifting to sort of fit in with people around us that we're engaging or in our sort of perceptual field. So this idea of the chameleon effect, unconscious mimicry. In an experiment, a confederate slash collaborator of the experimenter intentionally rubbed his or her face or shook a foot. This seemed to lead to a greater likelihood of the study participant doing the same behavior. Responding to social norms. When we are with other people and perceive a social norm, a correct or a normal way to behave or think in this particular group, and that's what a social norm in many ways is. We have a norm that says this is the expected behavior for this particular group in this particular situation. So when we are with other people and we perceive a social norm, we what we may do is this: our behavior may follow the norm rather than follow our own judgment. So we will put aside our own judgment, our own decision making capability, in lieu of going with and following whatever that social norm is. In the Ask Conformity studies, about one-third of the people will agree with obvious mistruths to go along with the group. So here we have, in this annotated slide here, we have this. That square has 5 sides. And then the other individual says, that square has 5 sides. And what they're doing here, they want to see that guy in the middle. They want to see if the guy in the middle here will conform. Will he also in turn say, the square has 5 sides? Even though they know that information is incorrect. This is the way Solomon Asch conducted his conformity studies. They had a bunch of collaborators, confederates in the experiment. So everybody in the experiment were working with the researcher except for one individual. They wanted to determine if that one individual would speak a mistruth or provide misinformation despite to the fact that they were giving incorrect information or providing an incorrect statement. So the way it went was this. They would have a standard line, okay, which comparison line looks the same as the standard line. So they have this standard line, and then they would have 1, 2, and 3 comparison lines. They would take turns answering to see if a consensus develops. And what they would do is they would allow it to go for some time where everyone would provide the right answer. For example, 2, 2, 2. Everyone would say 2. And then later, they would have a situation where somebody would say the obviously incorrect comparison line compared to the standard. They wanted to see if that one subject in that group would say whatever the other people were saying or say the correct information. And what they were able to determine is that a good number of them would provide the incorrect statement, the incorrect answer, despite the fact that it was obviously wrong. They would demonstrate conformity to norms. This is what happens. So, what makes you more likely to conform? That was the question that the researchers had then. So they were able to demonstrate that under these situations, people do seem to conform. They will provide misinformation or do something that goes against what they believe in order to fit in. So this is why they say conformity happens. One, You are not firmly committed to one set of beliefs or style of behavior. So you're more likely to conform when you're not really truly committed to any one particular idea or behavior. The other reason is the group is medium sized and unanimous. So the group is not particularly large, okay, or particularly small. It's sort of a medium sized group, and there's no individual who's giving them a contrary. There's no model of someone who's misconforming. Everyone seems to be saying the same stuff. So with a group, medium-sized group, and everyone seems to be agreeing with everyone else, then you see people are going to be more likely to conform in that particular situation. Then you admire or are attracted to the group. So if this group is some group that you wanted to belong with, okay, to be a member of for some time, you like and you've analyzed this group for some time, then you're more likely to conform. You have some sort of attraction level or you admire the group, more likely to conform. The group tries to make you feel incompetent, insecure, or closely watched. So they give you some sort of indication that if you do not conform with whatever they're doing, then they're going to treat you poorly. They're going to watch you. They're giving you some sort of indication that if you do not go along with them, you'd be made to feel incompetent or wrong or isolated. And your culture tends to encourage respect for norms. So, what they're saying here is the following: conformity is going to be more likely for an individual in this particular situation if one, they're not already committed to a certain behavior or belief, two, there are members of a medium sized group and everyone else tends to agree with this behavior or this course of action. Three, you tend to admire or were attracted to this group. Four, the group will make you feel incompetent or insecure or closely watched. So you have some indication that you would be punished if you don't go along with the group. And finally, your culture encourages respect for norms. So this would indicate that if you're part of a collectivist culture, you're going to be more likely to conform because they're all about getting along with the group. Individualistic cultures like ours would tend to be less conforming. This is not to say that we're not influenced greatly by conformity pressures, but we're going to be a lot less likely or probable to conform compared to individuals similar to us from a collectivist culture. So there are two types of social influence. We have normative social influence, going along with others in pursuit of social approval or belonging in order to avoid disapproval or rejection. Okay? Going along with others in pursuit of social approval, being liked or appreciated by that group, of being seen as belonging to that group. So this is what we saw in the Ash conformity studies and what we see, for example, when people choose or conform to clothing styles in their particular social group. Then we have informational social influence, going along with others because their ideas and behavior make sense. The evidence in our social environment changes our mind. For example, deciding which side of the road to drive on. So we have these social influences out there that make sense to you. Another way to look at this social influence too is the following: that it's not about approval or disapproval that you see in normative social influence, but informational social influence can also be that the other folks of this group may have more information than you have. Therefore, you look to them to guide your behavior. So they may have ideas and it may make sense because you don't have all the information available to you. That also is a form of social influence. Then we look at obedience. Obedience is response to command. Someone tells you to do something and you do it. That's you being obedient to a command. Milgram wanted to study the influence of direct commands on behavior. Stanley Milgram. The question: under what social conditions are people more likely to obey commands? The experiment. An authority figure tells participants to administer shocks to a learner. This person who's the learner was actually working with a confederate of the researcher, but the true subject of this experiment was not aware of that. So in this experiment, an authority figure would tell the participant to administer a shock to a learner when the learner gives wrong answer. Voltages increased. How high would people go? This was the design of the Stanley Milgram study. So we have an individual who's being strapped down on a chair here. That would be the learner. The learner's hand would be associated and tied to some sort of mechanism that would deliver an electric shock. To the right, you can see the way the room was laid out. So we'd have the individual, okay, who was the learner. He's the one that has the little call out button that says ow. He's the one who gets shocked. There would be a partition in the other room. You would have another person who says but okay. He's the person who's delivering the shocks. He's the teacher. So a question would be asked of the learner, and if the learner got the question wrong, the teacher would have to flip a switch, delivering a shock. The person in the upper right of this little diagram here is the authority figure. He would be there to provide guidance to the teacher, the one who flips the switch, when they would sort of not want to provide a shock. The shock levels are demonstrated at the bottom here. The shock levels in volts that the participants thought they were giving goes from slight shock all the way to XXX. So what they wanted to see is how often, what percentage of the people would go all the way to XXX, the extreme, to give a shock, an electrical shock, to an innocent person. Now, it should be noted that during this process, the learner was not really receiving any electric shock whatsoever. Okay, but they would have recordings allegedly of the learner, and they would be making noises, for example, like they were getting painful shocks, and they would say something like, oh, stop this, I want to stop the experiment, I don't want to do this anymore, I have a heart condition, or something of that nature. And then normally the teacher, the one who's administering the shock, would look to their authority figure there, the researchers, and the researcher would say something like, please continue, the experiment must continue. And then the person would normally continue the shock. So how many people do you think, what percentage of the people would go all the way from moderate to strong to very strong to intense to extreme intensity to danger severe to XXX? How many people would go to the ultimate, the maximum amount of electric shock? In surveys, most people would predict that in such a situation, they would stop administering shocks when the learner expressed pain. But in reality, even when the learner complained of a heart condition, most people complied with the experimenter's directions to please continue, or you must continue, or the experiment requires that you continue. How many people? Well, how many people? Well, over 65%. The majority of participants continued to obey the authority figure all the way to the very, very end. XXX. So what we see here, these individuals were studied prior to taking part in this experiment. They took surveys, so they did not have any major psychopathy or some issue that would make them more likely to hurt an innocent person. So they were normal folks, okay, from the population. And under the right circumstances, they complied to hurt an innocent individual. So, what factors increased obedience? When orders were given by someone with legitimate authority, someone associated with a prestigious institution, and someone standing close by. When the learner slash victim is in another room, when other participants obey and or no one disobeys, meaning there's no role model for defiance, and other evidence of the power of obedience. The bad news: in war, some people at the beginning choose not to fight and kill, but after that, obedience escalates, even in the killing of innocent people. The good news: obedience can also strengthen heroism. Soldiers and others risk or even sacrifice themselves more so when under orders. So let me give a little bit of background here. Stanley Milgram conducted these experiments because this was shortly after World War II, when it was revealed to the world that the German citizens under the Nazi regime had committed some atrocities, killing millions of individuals in concentration camps. And so the question was, how could an intelligent society, a society very much like other societies, allow this to happen? So they want to see if people are just like the German folks were during that time frame, obedient to authority figures. And the research indicates that they are. That we tend to be obedient when there is a legitimate authority figure, someone that we deem as someone who represents the authority of our society. We do what they tell us to. So the lessons from all of this, the lessons from the conformity and obedience studies. When under pressure to conform or obey, ordinary, principled people will say and do things they never would have believed they would do. The real evil may be in the situation. The situations that are constructed are what make people perform certain types of acts that they normally thought they would never. So to look a person committing harmful acts and assume that the person is cruel or evil would be making a fundamental attribution error.